Good afternoon, everyone. As Mr. Kaha said, I'm Rory Roccio. I want to briefly introduce the topic of the Far East. Russia is a huge country. I think most people don't realize exactly that it is also an Asian country and shares a border with China, Mongolia, North Korea, has territorial disputes with Japan, and is also very close to the United States and Alaska. So the role of Russia in East Asia is very special and unique. The topic is getting even more important as Russia is kind of shifting its, they say the Pavorot na Vostok, the shift to the east, which has started to occur since the Soviet collapse. And what we've seen in the last, for example, between 2000 between 2000 and 2010, the Russian Far East saw a 950% increase in imports and 430% increase in exports. So we see a massive boost in trade coming from the region. The region has suffered from underdevelopment under Soviet control. And so now under the Russian Federation, we see efforts to repopulate the east. You see there's a few sporadic population centers, Yakutia, Magadan, and then down here in the south there's Vladivostok, Khabarovsk, and Blagoveshchensk. But mostly the territory is just kind of open. It's rich with natural resources, as we'll go into later. So now moving on to my topic more specifically, the development of Russian higher education in the context of Russia's shift to the east. Putin said a very peculiar thing in 2014, addressing the Union of Rectors of the Russian Federation, along with the Russian Academy of Sciences. The university should become the development centers of the regions. And so I was wondering, my research questions are based on how these universities, especially the internationalization of these universities, can hinder or promote the development of the region of the Russian Far East. I was able to answer most of these questions through my research and through interviews with experts in the Far East. Here we have, does the Russian central government promote internationalization as a means of increasing economic cooperation? How is international education promoted? And what can be done to increase the potential of development through internationalization? So it's hard to talk about Russian higher education in a specific region of Russia because the system is very centralized. And so what happens is you have to discuss the development of higher education as a whole in Russia and then try to bring it down to the regional level. Here's some of the trends that I found in exploring the development of higher education. One is the shift to Western education cycles. In 2003, the Russian Federation adopted the Bologna cycle, which is the Western-style four-year bachelor, two-year master's programs. This has not been implemented in every university, but it's still, the direction is definitely going there. There's a special focus on international rankings. We'll get more to that in a second. It's really important. Accreditation and quality control, that's because in the 90s there was a massive boom in the amount of private universities, and there was fear that they were becoming kind of credential and diploma factories. And so recently the federal government has taken a heavier hand in verifying the quality of education. And in fact, by last year there was a plan to decrease the amount of universities in Russia by 40%. I'm not exactly sure if that goal was reached, but I do know that a lot of those universities were affected and were shut down, especially private universities. The next trend is consolidation. We see a lot of the old Soviet technical institutes, economic institutes, and research institutes being consolidated into more multi-purpose universities. There's new focus on research. This is due to Russia's decreasing share and competitiveness in high-tech exports. And so it's very much a kind of a human capital focus on education that we see. And finally, student mobility, which is the main topic of my research. Basically, that's increasing numbers of ingoing and outbound students, which you can't talk about without discussing the Project 5100, Project 500, which is the Ministry of Education and Sciences program to get 5 Russian universities into the world's rankings of the top 100 universities, according to QS, the Shanghai rankings, and Times Higher Education. All of which, actually the Shanghai not as much, but QS and THE very much value internationalization in the rankings, between 5 and 10% of the total score. A lot of the scores is actually based on reputation as well. And so the Russian universities don't do so well in reputation. So there's actually, they've actually created their own international ranking, which is yet to really be implemented, but that's down the works. If you have questions, you can ask me about that in a minute. So internationalization is being pushed by the central government. We see dramatic increases in the number of international students, especially right here. This is between the 2011 and 2012 academic years with the implementation of Project 5100, where the growth increased to about 10 and 13% of international students per year. The growth of international students is not unique to Russia. What's unique is the rate of growth. And Russia has quickly climbed to the number 6 destination for international students worldwide. And you see the growth rate here is pretty substantial compared to everyone besides the Philippines. But you know, they have a smaller number of students, so I don't know if that is if that counts. Where the students are coming from, mostly the Commonwealth of Independent States, the former Soviet countries, which we see here in yellow. They make up about 70% of the students. China takes the number 4 spot, around 20,000. That number has also increased quite dramatically over the past few years. However, it's been kind of hovering around 20,000. There are plans, well, I've heard, I haven't had this verified, but I've heard there's plans to increase the number to 35 to 40,000 within the next 5 years or so. But I don't know if that will be true or what. Here we have Mongolia actually has a significant amount, much more than Japan, Korea, and North Korea. So there's definitely a lot more students coming from, when we're talking about Eastern neighbors, China takes up way more spots than do Japan and Korea, and you see that in some other factors, indicators I'll go over in a second. The outbound students, China is interestingly the most popular destination for students leaving the Russian Federation. Japan, Korea, Mongolia are not very popular destinations for students. The reasons are various depending on the country. So there's definitely a disparity between who's coming to Russia and where Russian students are leaving to. It's kind of interesting. However, I want to point out that Russia it's a really popular, or China is a really popular destination for Russian students. It's actually the number 5 spot. One more thing I wanted to point out with this infographic is that the amount of Russian students of China it's a lot. It's high relative to other origins of students. However, China is in the top 5 spots, if not the top spot, for the origin of international students for many countries worldwide. And so it's not necessarily unique that Russia has a lot of Chinese students. So what does this look like on the ground in Vladivostok and in Khabarovsk, where we had the opportunity to visit? At FEFU, they have around 13% international students. So out of the 20,000 students, about 13% of those are international students. About 60% of those are Chinese. That number is rising. The Project 5100 is pushing to get to 15%. The University International Department informed me they're trying to get to 25% by 2020, which is I found to be a little absurd. There's definitely a focus on quantity of students, bring in as many foreign students as they can. And there's not so much a focus on quality, and especially when it comes to knowledge of Russian language, because a lot of the students are not necessarily they don't have adequate Russian language skills to really participate in the degree programs that are completely done in Russian. The way they're attracting students is through partnerships. Both these universities have long lists of partners, university partners in China especially, but also in Japan and Korea. This is the main mechanism for attracting students. They try to, what I was told is that they try to focus on providing quality education, beneficial experiences, so when students go home, they become the vehicle of advertising themselves. So it's done through those two methods, through partnerships and just through providing quality education. The internationalization is not entirely pushed by the central government. There's some local benefits as well. The teachers value having diverse classrooms, having diversity of opinions in the classroom. That's really important to them. They saw that to be important to personal development and academic development. And additionally, universities see revenue from attracting international students. These two universities specifically are on the high end of that, around $600,000 to $700,000 annually from foreign students. However, in Russia as a whole, only about 50% of universities that have international students actually see revenue from it. Some people speculate that this is because the purpose of internationalization is not revenue, but soft power projection, which is partially related to the topic here. So how can we see these kind of, so what is really the development potential? We're talking back to Putin's statement of, these universities should be the development centers of the regions. FIFU is kind of unique in that it's a federal university, which is a special status, and it's also a participant in the 5100 project. So there's, in the mission statement it's ingrained, it's actually it's the only sentence in the mission statement. The university exists to increase cooperation in the Far Eastern region and Eastern Asia and the Pacific region. So they've developed, they have tons of projects. This is one that's of special importance, the Russian Center for Asian Pacific Integration and Development. And I think every department of the university has its own connections with universities in the neighboring countries. It's a little bit similar in Pacific National, but it's not quite at the level that FIFO is because they receive so much federal funding. As I mentioned, they have lots of partners with universities, which has a lot of potential to get people talking between nations, crossing those cultural boundaries. However, basically what this means is that a lot of the cooperation is on kind of institutional level, and it's not so much in developing those human relationships between students, which is important. But as long as a large, significant amount of these students can't speak Russian, then that potential is extremely limited. It's kind of a question of hot debate in the universities right now, is whether or not they should introduce Russian language tests as part of the application process. Some people argue that no, this will reduce the amount of students that we're able to bring to the university, and others say, well, no, it's critical that we bring students that know how to speak Russian to study in our Russian language programs. To me, the debate is a little bit absurd because to me it seems obvious that of course they should test for Russian language, but it's actually a topic of debate. In conclusion, the Russian central government is pushing for internationalization to improve cooperation in the Far East. And it's being pushed primarily by partnerships with universities and what can be done to increase the potential of internationalization. That number one for me is getting students that are actually able to come here, or come to the Russian Far East, interact with students, build friendships, build that social capital, make connections, and that's when I think they'll start seeing more real mid-level economic integration as opposed to this kind of mass exchange of raw materials that is really not exchange between people, but exchange between governments. And that's it. If you have any questions, then save them to the end.